All right, everyone, welcome to our week 9 live classroom. Pretty crazy that we're already in week 9. But for those of you who are here, I'm glad that you can make it. For those of you watching this, I hope that this will be helpful for you guys. Before we dive into week 9, so for this, if you guys haven't noticed, we don't have a new chapter this week, which is exciting. We're still in chapter 8, working on repetition. You guys have 2 assignments this week. But I wanted to ask if you guys had any questions from last week or any questions about the chapter before we get started.
I had questions about counting and
Sentinel controlled loops?
yes, that's it.
Okay. All right. So let's see. So a counting loop is when you know exactly how many times you're going to loop through something, and the loop will loop a certain number of times. Okay, and you know exactly what that number is. You know, so let's take the program from last week, for example. It was this one. Let me blow this up a little bit. All right, so get sum of odd integers. So right here, I said, well, I is less than or equal to user integer. Okay, so this is a counting loop because you can see right here, I'm incrementing I every time I loop through it. Depending on what user integer is, I will know exactly what it is. You know, if the user types in 10 or 50, I know, okay, I'm gonna loop through this 10 or 50 times. So this is a counting loop. Now, let's say I wanted to make a sentinel controlled loop, just for an example for you guys. I could say I would loop through this until sum is an even number, or until sum is an odd number. Okay, so sum I declared as 0, and I would say, okay, stop looping once sum is an even number or an odd number, or once sum is greater than 100. You know, I wouldn't know off the top of my head exactly how many times that would loop through it, you know, because it is not a counting loop. It is something that is sentinel controlled or dependent on something else, the value of something else. In this case, it was sum. So a counting loop, you always know you're just going to count from 0 to however many you want to do, or something like that, but you're going to count and you know exactly how many times you're going to loop through it. Sentinel controlled is when your loop will end based on a different condition being met. Okay, for this example, I said, okay, if sum, as soon as sum breaks 100, or as soon as sum is an odd number, we're going to stop looping. And that would be an example of a sentinel controlled loop. Does that answer your question, Lynette?
It helps, yeah.
It helps. We could type it out real quick if you'd like.
No, that's okay.
Okay.
Actually,
Yeah, I just couldn't tell the difference, so.
Yeah. Sorry, was someone else talking?
yeah, I was wondering if you would mind changing it to a sentinel control.
Yeah, not at all. Okay, so I have sum right here declared and assigned the value of 0. And instead of saying, well, I is less than or equal to user integer, I don't want to count for this, so I'll say, and granted, this won't get the sum of odd integers, so ignore that function name. But let's say while sum is less than 100. Okay, so sum is declared as 0, and this might look like a counting loop, but it won't go through 100 times. So let's go ahead and write here. So we're incrementing sum. We'll add that value of I to sum every time it goes through. And every time I is an odd value, we'll just leave that there. And I'm also going to increment sum right here. And not that this is going to change how many times I'm looping through. Wait, sorry, I'm not going to do that. But right here, I'm just going to alert I. Okay, and so when we're done looping, we'll see how many times we looped through this. Okay, because I will increment every time. I'm still incrementing I. And so at the end of it, we'll just alert I to see what we got, see how many times we looped through it. Okay, so I'm going to come over here and run this, and let's say I put in 50 as my integer. Actually, you know what? Let's do 200. All right, I'm going to run my function, and we looped through. It took 20 loops for sum to be more than 100. Okay, I think that's what we put, right? Oh, while sum is less than 100. So it took 20 loops until sum was greater than 100 or equal to 100. Okay, and so knowing that it only looped 20 times, you can see that this while loop was not conditional upon a counter that we were doing. Okay, every time we added a value to sum, and as soon as sum was not less than 100, we stopped looping. Okay, and so that's one example. Okay, I was going to loop as long as sum was less than 100. Let's keep looping. That is a sentinel controlled loop. Okay, another one I could do is while sum is, I could do something like this right here where we check to see if it's an odd number. I could say while sum modulus 2 is equal to 0. Okay, let's do not equal to 0. Okay, and so this one right here will loop as many times as it takes for sum to be an odd number, and then it will stop looping. So if I ran this again and typed in 200, looks like I have an error here in my code. No, might not. Well, sum modulus 2 is not equal to 0. Take that off. And you see it was on the 0th time that it looped through. So the first time that it looped through, it found that, and then it didn't end up having to do anything else. Okay, and so this is another example of a sentinel controlled loop right here. And then a counting loop is just any time you have a counter like this, and you're going to loop through just every single time until your counter's up. So in this case, until we've reached this value. Or it could be like 100, and I would know that this would loop through 100 times. Actually 101 times, because it'll loop through for 0 and for 100. Does that help you guys?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, yeah. If I won't be offended if it didn't help.
It didn't help me.
It didn't help? Okay.
It's just not clear. I mean, how do you look at the code and just tell this is counting, this is sentinel controlled? I just can't see it,
Yeah, so generally if it's counting, you'll see something inside of the while loop or the for loop that is incrementing, and that is what is dependent on how many times it will loop. So if we did a for loop right here as well, and you can see this, I would declare I as 0. I'd say, well, I is less than or equal to user integer, and then I++. Okay, and that's what this exact loop would look like as a for loop. Okay, these would do the exact same thing. But notice here that I'm incrementing I, and I'm also counting by I. Like I will loop, the loop is conditional on what I is, and I is the one that's incrementing. Okay. So that's kind of how you can tell that it's a counting loop, is if the thing that you're looping by, like your condition for your loop, is based on an iterated value, something that you're like increasing every time.
Okay. That makes sense to me.
Okay. So, and so notice like when I did the sum, I said, while sum is less than 100, that has nothing to do with I, that's incrementing.
Okay.
Like I'm changing sum in here, but I'm not like incrementing I or incrementing sum by 1 every time. And if I rewrote the for statement or the for loop like that, like I declared I here, I'm incrementing I, but my loop, I'm looping on a condition that's completely independent of that counter.
Okay.
Okay.
I got that. Okay.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
All right. Any other questions?
I've got one.
Yeah, go for it.
Can you go to the example of in chapter 8, I think it's example 14, where it starts at 0 and like prints every number starting from 0. I think all the even numbers between 1 and whatever the integer is. Does that make sense?
All right. Yeah, let me see if I can just find it real quick. All right, so chapter 8, and it was one of the examples at the end?
Yeah, not in the review questions, but
oh, but it was one of these.
Yeah, one of these. So it's example 14.
14.
I think.
This guy right here?
Yeah, that's the one. Okay.
Nice.
So
All right. And what's your question?
my question is, so since it's a loop, the way this works is it starts off at 0 and then goes 2, 4, 6, 8, I think. Yeah. So what I don't understand is why it doesn't go 0, 2, 0, 4, 0, 6, 0, 8. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Because if this line output plus equals comma plus I, if it's looping through that, I would think that it would just loop that continuously and go 0, 2, 0, 4, 6. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and that's a great question. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to come over here to this file real quick, and I'm going to throw this code in here, and we're going to run it with a debugger. I think that'll be the easiest way to show you what's going on here. All right, so we have output equals 0, I equals 2. While I is less than or equal to 10, we're going to do this stuff, add to output, increment I by 2, and then we'll output that. Okay, so I'm going to delete that and delete that. Okay. So I'm going to run this in the browser. We don't care about what's on the page. Sorry about all this stuff. We are worried about this and this alone. So I'm going to run my function. So output is 0. All right. I is equal to 2. And while I is less than or equal to 10, we're going to loop through this. So probably like 5 times, right? Because I is being incremented by 2 every time. So the first time, output is at 0. And notice output is a string. Okay, it might look like a number, but we do have a string here, and so we won't do any like math or anything other than just basic string concatenation, which could be like into addition. Okay, so output is a string of 0, and then when we do this, we're going to add a comma, a space, and then I, which will be converted to a string as soon as we concatenate it all onto output. Okay, so if I hit F10, we can see the output is 0, 2, and then we'll increment I. Okay, so I is up to 4. All right. Now notice the last time we hit line 27 in this, output was 0, and we didn't add 0 at all. We added a single comma and I. Okay, and so this time when we loop through it, again, we don't care about what output was initialized as. Okay, what we declared to add initially. Okay, we only care about what its current value is. And then whatever it is, we'll just add on to it these 3 characters, the comma, the space, and whatever I is. Okay, so if I hit F10 again, you can see it didn't add 0 or 2 or anything like that. It just added a comma, a space, and then I, which was 4. Does that make sense?
No, I'm still trying to wrap my head around that.
So let's think about, if I change this a little bit, let's say I have output of A, okay? And every time I loop through this, I'm just going to add A, okay? Now, what do you think this will look like at the very end after I've looped through this like 5 times? Think there'll be like 5 A's or 10 or 25? What do you think? And anyone can answer this.
Oh, yeah. The way that I would think 5 A's.
You think 5 A's? Let's check it. Let me remove this. Whoops. Let that go. Refresh. Beautiful A's here. Let's run this function. All right, so output is A, a single A. And then all we're going to do is just add another single A. Okay. And then I'll come through here again. And all this is saying is whatever output is, it doesn't matter. We're just going to add a single A. Okay. We're up to 3 A's. Now we're up to 4 A's. Now we're up to 5 A's. Okay. And that was it. Okay. So this guy right here is a shorthand additional assignment operator. And so if I was going to rewrite this, I could say output equals output plus A. These do the exact same thing. okay? And so I'm just taking whatever output is and I'm just adding A onto it, okay? But I'm not taking anything that was previously, I'm just taking its current value and adding A on top of it. Does that help?
Well, yeah, that's how I would have expected it to work the first time with the 0, comma plus
Yeah,
I.
yeah. So if I undo all this, let's go back to our original code here. And so this right here, if I rewrite this, it's the exact same thing as saying output equals, and then we're just going to have output, oops, plus that plus I. Okay, and so we're just taking whatever output was, and we're just going to add a comma, and then whatever the new value of I is, and we'll just add that onto the string that was there already. Okay, does that help, Garrett?
Oh, yeah. Okay, that makes sense.
Okay,
Okay,
all right,
yeah.
awesome. Okay, again, I won't be offended if it didn't make sense. I can try again. But,
So
all
the
right.
only thing then that that the loop is adding is just the comma and the I,
Yes, yep,
basically.
that's it.
Even though it goes through and prints output, it will only ever print output once.
Once, yep, because it's not in a loop. If I
What
put it
if
up,
you wanted what if you
yeah.
wanted to though? Like
If I
what if you wanted output to be repeated?
So this is something that's kind of tricky because the way that the program would behave if I stuck this output in here, um, if I ran this right now, so we know that our string at the very end was like 0, comma 2, comma 4, and so forth. You know, and if I ran this in here, it would assign a new value to this display div inner HTML every single time I loop, which could cause issues. In this case, it would end up being the same thing at the end, even though it would assign a value to that inner HTML 5 times or 6 times or however many times it loops through. So if I, let me change this real quick to output div so that we can actually see it display here. If I run this function, you can see output is being appended to, oh, whoops, what's the error we got? Kind of set property inner HTML of null. Oh, I didn't refresh the page. Sorry, guys. There we go. Okay. So we get down here, there is an output div down here, okay? And you can see here, it just put this on the page, 0, comma 2, what output is currently, okay? And if I keep looping, now you can see it assigned a new value to the inner HTML. If I keep going, again, it assigned a new value all the way until we get to our final one, and then it doesn't do anything because there's nothing after the while statement. Okay, so with this program, the user wouldn't even have seen that, okay? If I don't have this breakpoint right here and I refresh this page and I run it, it's going to be so fast, it'll just all appear, you know? So in essence, it's pretty much the same thing, but there are conditions, there are times where this would output something that you don't want because it will only output the final value, okay? But yeah, so that's what happens if you put this in here. Just every time it loops, it'll assign a new value to your output div. So does that help answer that question?
No, my question was, what if you wanted it to go just to kind of explore, what if you wanted it to go 02, 04, 06, like the way I originally expected it to behave? How
So
would
like
you make it
02,
that?
04, 06.
Yeah, where it like repeats output instead of just listing output
Yeah.
once.
All right, so let's move this back to where it was. And if I wanted it to repeat this right here, I would go like this. Okay, so now with this plus equals thing right here, it's already gonna have output and we're just gonna add on to output. And so if I added on to output, output again, this would in essence be add 0 and then have a comma and then I, whatever I is. So if I ran this right now, you can see that's how it would look because every single time I'm adding that 0. okay? And it would be the exact same thing if I put output right there because, well, I guess output will change, okay? But if you wanted that 0 every time, then you could just put a 0 right here and then a comma, I guess, if you wanted to. And then if you ran it, I mean, we got to figure out how, I guess it'd have to be like that or something along those lines, you know? But you could add that in there and that's how you do it. Because if I put output in here, output is going to increment, output's going to change in value. And so if I ran it putting output right there, output will just keep on getting bigger and bigger along with the numbers. So does that help answer your question?
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. Thanks.
Okay, yeah. And then if I wrote it without this, it would look like this. Oops. Output plus output, or output plus 0, like you were saying. So, all right, great question. Any other questions?
I have one.
Yeah, go for it.
In that last program you were running for me, you put alert. When do you use the alert?
So most people don't really like a bunch of pop-ups on their page, you know, so when you want to display data on the page, we usually use inner HTML, okay? I used alert just now, just as a very simple way of saying, you know, this is what I is, this is how many times we're going to loop through this. That's just a simple example. Like I wouldn't ever want to like leave this in my code, you know, but it can make it easy just to like show you a piece of data.
Okay.
To show you exactly what it would be at. Another way that you can do that is to say console.log. And what that does, if I ran this right now, I don't see anything on the page. I don't have any pop-ups that I have to close, but if I go to console, you can see it did log this. Okay, and I said console.log I, and so that is whatever I ended up being. Okay, so the last time we incremented I, we went from 10 to 12, we stopped looping, and then I printed this to the console. Okay, and I could put strings in here and be like, I ended up being, okay, have some nice string concatenation here, and then if I ran it again, you can see I ended up being 12. Okay, and so, and that would be the, in essence, the same thing as if I change this to alert and ran this. It would just alert this, I ended up being 12 instead of putting it in with the console. Okay, so those are just ways that, really easy ways of just like spitting out data to, you know, in this case, to help me see and help me show you guys how many times we loop through it.
Okay, but we should always use the output div to output.
Yes. Yep. Generally speaking, yes. I mean, sometimes you'll have like a prompt for a user or something, which will like pop up with like an input, you know, and there's a place for that. But generally speaking, you'll have, if you want the user to input data, it'll have like a form on the page. You'll make a form on the page for that, and then output onto the page as well.
Okay.
Looks like we have a question in our chat here from Spencer. So how do you enter in a 200 number, yet you set the the sum to alert when less than 100? Started above 100 minus, so you made an independent loop of the condition. Okay. Spencer, sorry, it looks like I forgot to answer this 15 minutes ago. So let's move on to the one you asked a second ago. You go over review question 7. All right, is this, okay, is this review question 7 right here that you pasted in here, Spencer? Okay, all right, so let's check this out. So review question 7, function countdown, parse int from the user. All right, and what was the question here? I see this code, I'm gonna paste it in here so we can check it out. But what was the question for number 7? All right, let me pull it up real quick. And is this, for last week, I guess, for last week's review questions. Let's see here. All right, well, I'm just gonna walk through this code then with you real quick. All right, so countdown. So this function countdown, let me remove that just so we're not confused. And this as well. All right, we have output, which is initiated as a string. Skip, so it looks like the user is going to put in a number, which we're going to parse into a whole number. Var I equals 100, while I is greater than or equal to 0. Output plus equals I plus break, I minus equals skip. Okay, so the user is going to put in a number, and that is how we're going to increment or decrement I. Okay, so if I put in 5, we're going to loop from 100 down to 0. So while I is greater than or equal to 0, we're going to loop this, and then we're just going to have an output string, adding I to it, and we can see what that skipping will look like. So if I run this right now, let me put this function right here, and change that to match that. And let's run this. All right, I'm gonna check the sources tab, make sure the new code's there. It is. I'm gonna type in 5 run function. Something weird's going on. Okay, so, oh, got an error right there. Forgot to change one. All right, so if I type in 5 and run the function, so skip is equal to 5, I is 100. While I is greater than or equal to 0, we're going to add I to output and break. Okay, so output is, I is currently at 100, and so we'll add that to output, and we'll add a break. Okay, and then we'll go again, and we went down 5, so I is now at 95, and so we'll add 95 and then a break. This looks kind of ugly, but when it prints up in the HTML over here, it'll just have like a nice little list from 100 down to 0, skipping down by 5s because that's what the user put in. Okay, let me check your chat here. All right, so with this program, you can run it if you're having issues with a desk check, like you said. You can do exactly what I just did. You can run it in an HTML file. You can stick a breakpoint in here and see exactly what output is going to equal every time. So notice, like, if I run this again, you can see output. The first time output, it'll just be an empty string. And then as soon as I put this here, that's what output is at. Okay, and then every time I loop, we're going to add I and a break to output, and so that's what it'll look like every time. Oops. So you said the output should look like 100 space break. And if we wanted to do that, we would just need a space right here before the break inside of that string. Yeah, yep. So does that help answer your question? Okay, awesome. All right. Any other questions? These are awesome questions, by the way. I had like programs ready to go to like code with you guys, but this is awesome. So any other questions? Okay, in that case, let's look at chapter 8. So at the end of chapter 8, there were a bunch of programming assignments. All right, and we're not going to go through all of them because I also want to get to the exam here in a little bit. But are there any of these assignments that you would like to review with me to look at? I skipped a couple in here because we had some assignments, so we're not going to look at those. But there are several others here. So this first one says write a defining table in a program that reads an integer n from the keyboard. So that was our assignment last week. Write a defining table in a program that reads a phrase and an integer n from the keyboard and then displays that phrase n times in a div. Write a defining table in a program that outputs the first 25 numbers in this Fibonacci series. That's a fun one. Rewrite the number guessing game so that it counts the number of guesses the user takes to correctly guess the answer. And had 3 more here, it looks like. Asks the user for an integer and then outputs the following table. Has like a little like times table right here. Write a defining table in a program that builds and displays a 12 by 12 multiplication table, and then one that allows a user to enter 10 numbers and then computes and outputs the average of those numbers. Any of these you want to see?
Can you show the 11?
This one right here, this last one?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, let's do it. All right, so write a defining table in a program that allows a user to enter 10 numbers and then computes and outputs the average. Okay, so if I was just going to think through this, so there's probably going to be like 10 inputs unless I ended up, you know, having some way to like split a string. If we had like a certain delimiter, like if we had like a comma delimited list of numbers, I could split that using JavaScript, or I'd have 10 inputs, okay? So we'd take in 10 numbers from the user, regardless of how, and then just thinking through my loop, I would have to add all of those numbers together and then divide by the total number of numbers, which would be 10. So let's look at this here. So input 10 integers, add all of them, divide by 10, display the average. Okay, we good to this point? All right, so in here, the way that I did it was I had 10 inputs. Look at this beautiful thing. Okay, so down here, I have 10 inputs, each with a unique ID, just numbered, and a break for each one. And then in here, I have to get all those values. I added them to a total, and then I divided that total by 10. So with this example, I didn't even need a loop because there was absolutely nothing dynamic about this program. If I let the user input however many numbers they wanted, and I said, okay, I'm going to add all these numbers together, I would have to have a loop to say, you know, for every number that they enter in, add it, and then divide by however many they added in. I would have to have a loop. With this way, I just got, you know, all of these inputs, added them, and I knew I got 10 inputs. And so let's do both ways. So I'm going to copy this file path, and I'm going to paste it in here. 10 numbers. Calculate average is 11.9. Okay, and if I open this up and went to the sources tab and stuck a breakpoint in right here and hit calculate average, you can see up here I'm declaring 3 values. I have number count, total, and number array, and I'm going to parse float each one of my inputs and just add that to the total. Okay, so total is now 5. The next one we're going to add is 6, and now total is 11. Added all of them, and then at the bottom, divided that total by 10 to get our average. Okay, now that's pretty simple. It's also pretty ugly. Okay, and the reason why I say it's ugly is just because this is really not that reusable, not at all. Okay, so a much more effective way to do something like this is to say, okay, the user can enter in any number of numbers that they want, and we'll compute that average. So let's do that. So first things first, if you guys wanted to figure out how to do this, I would say Google JavaScript split string. Okay, and so if I looked at this, we have this nice little split function that's built into JavaScript, and it takes in a single parameter. Okay, so we have this string and we're going to split it, and when we split it, we have to specify a delimiter. So just now I said we could use a comma. This example is using a space. And if I click on this, it'll say, how are you doing today? And it took out all my spaces. Okay, so I could also Google JavaScript split string by comma. Okay, into an array, split comma separated string into using JavaScript. So if I look down here, you can see they did the exact same thing, string.split by comma. All right, and let's see what that gets us. So let's say I have a single input, and I'll just say, I'm not going to parse it, document.get element by ID. user input dot value. Okay, and I'll say var user input equals that. And then down here, I'm going to comment out all of this. Say input type text, and ID is user input. Okay, so there's our input. And then in here, once I get this user input, I'm going to have to say var split input equals user input dot split. And we're going to split it by a comma. Okay, so in my program, I might want to have something that says, you know, please enter a comma delimited guys, don't judge me on my spelling, delimited list. Delimited. Okay, sorry about that, guys. This is embarrassing. All right. That's why I'm a programmer and not like an English teacher. All right, I think I still spelled that wrong. Okay, who cares? All right, please enter a comma delimited list. So if I come into here, let's just make sure this is working and run that. All right, please enter a comma delimited list. And say I put in like 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And let's put a breakpoint right here to see what it does. So I have my user input, good old string with commas in it. And when I split it by the comma, you can see I have an array, okay, with 5 values in it. Okay, now arrays are really nice because you can loop through arrays, all right? So now that I have this array with each one of these strings, here's what I'm gonna do. I do not need this anymore. And I'm just gonna say for I in split input. Okay, I'm gonna say split input. And we're dealing with arrays. We haven't really touched on arrays much lately, but this was actually an array. Okay, so split input, I'm going to parse that, and we're going to have a total. So I'll say total plus equals split input at the index of I, and I'm going to parse that because it's currently a string. Okay, and then for average, we'll take the total divided by split input dot length. Okay, which is something that you can do with arrays to see the length of an array. All right, let's see if this is going to work for us. So if I say 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, calculate average. Okay, so if I look at split input, you can see I have these 5 values in here. You can see the length right here is 5, and that's what I'm using down below. And if I highlight over this with these parentheses and I, you can see it has just the first element in it. Okay, because I right now is 0. Okay, and if I take split input at the index of 0, I get 5. Okay, so I'll add 5 to the total, parsing it, and then I'll add 4 to the total, and 3 to the total, and so forth. And then down here, I have total, which is 15, divided by split input dot length, which is 5, which gets us an average of 3. Okay, so that is how we could make this program a little bit better and not have just a huge number of inputs, but have a reusable loop. Okay. Do you have any questions? Does anyone have any questions about this?
I have a question.
By either method, yeah.
I'm sorry if I should know this, but why after split input, why did you use the other kind of parentheses around I?
So split input, let's change the name to number array, okay, which is what I had at one point in here. So split input, we did split the input, but when you do that, it turns into an array. Okay, and you wouldn't know this because we haven't touched it yet. Okay, we'll cover arrays in a couple of weeks. But when you split an input, okay, using something to split it by, in this case a comma, it turns it into an array. It takes out whatever used to split it, so it took out all my commas, and it took every value between all the commas and put it into their own element in the array. Okay, and then these right here, these little square brackets, are how you reference specific indices of an array. So when I was debugging this, you saw that I started off at 0 in this loop, and then it would isolate that index. So it said number array at index of I. Okay, so the first time it was index of 0, and then it was index of 1, and then it was index of 2. And so this is just syntax for how you isolate specific elements inside of an array.
Okay. And is it,
Yeah.
are they only for arrays, that specific parenthesis?
The square brackets are for arrays. They can also be used on objects. An array is a type of an object. We'll cover that more in a couple of weeks, but they are most commonly used on arrays.
Thank you.
Yeah, good questions. And Lana, did that help? Did you have questions about that or anything else specific that you wanted to see working through this one?
I think I'll just need to go back and rewatch it all because it's like a lot.
Okay.
I have a question. How to know
Yeah.
what to Google? Because you said, Google a string, it's like, how do you know what to Google?
So let's see, if I Googled this, let's say I said how to turn string into array JavaScript. Okay. Obviously, you have to mention what language you're using, otherwise you'll find something like Python or Java and it won't work. But I could Google this, how to turn string into an array. And then you see this split came up again, this exact same thing that we just saw. So a lot of the times, if you think about how you need to do something, you can just Google it and there'll be like Stack Overflow questions on here again. So you convert string with commas to an array. Like that's exactly what we just did. And that's because it's a pretty common thing that you have to do. So yeah, I don't know if that helps.
I think it's just sometimes you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah, it's very true. It's very true. But yeah, good question. And if I can ever help with that, just let me know. Spencer just asked when did we go over arrays, and I'll admit again that we have not gone over arrays. In executing this program, my initial program didn't have an array in here. I wanted to show you guys how else we could do this program. Okay, my initial one didn't have an array. We just added total over and over again with each of these values, and then we computed its average. Okay.
Why was this program in the assignments with the loop?
It's a really good question. Because like I showed you guys just now, like you can use a loop to go through it. I could go through a loop. If these indices were like dynamic, I could go through a loop and use it like that. But really, you would have to have that have arrays figured out, I feel like, to use this with a loop. So yeah. All right. So moving back over here, any of these other programs that you guys wanted to see before we look at the exam?
I would like to see one, number 7.
Number 7, write a defining table in a program that outputs the first 25 numbers in this Fibonacci series. Anyone know what the Fibonacci series is? This is a great loop example. So let's Google Fibonacci series. Okay, so the Fibonacci series, I love this little image right here. It's a series of numbers in which each number is the sum of the two preceding it. Okay, so if you look at this right here, like I have 2 right here, the 2 numbers preceding it were 1 and 1, 1 and 1, 1 plus 1 equals 2, 1 plus 2 equals 3, 3 plus 2 equals 5, 5 plus 3 equals 8, and so forth. And when it's graphed, this is what it looks like. Okay, this is a really good example for loops. Let's see, which one was that? Number 7. So let's look at number 7 real quick. So my defining table, input is none. We don't need it because the Fibonacci series just starts at 0. And then we loop, I said 24 times, then create a message and add the sum of the previous 2 numbers each time we loop. Okay. So Fibonacci generator, I declared a bunch of variables up here at the top. Okay. I declared number 24 because that's how many times the program said to do it. It said output the first 25 numbers in it. And we're starting with 0. Okay, that'll be our first number. And then we'll add 24 numbers on top of that. Okay, declared A is 1, B is 0. So we have our first two numbers here just to kind of get us started, because if I tried adding 0 on itself over and over again, we wouldn't get anywhere. Message, I just declared as a string of 0. And then I have a temp value displayed here as well. And let's look through our while loop right here. So I said while number, which we specified as 24, however many times we want to loop, is greater than 0. And then at the end of this loop, we're going to decrease number by 1. Okay. And then in our loop, I'm going to say temp, and I'm going to assign the value of A to temp, which is currently 1. And I'm doing this so that I can reassign the value of A. Okay. So if I didn't have a temp value right here, or a temp variable to store stuff, it'd be really hard to add the previous two values without changing them and being able to keep track of everything. So A is 1. I assign that to temp, so now temp is 1. And then A plus B, B is currently 0. So A would be 1 again. And then B, I assign the value of temp. So now B is 1. All right, so at the end of this, A and B are both 1 instead of being 1 and 0. And the next time we go through, we'd add A and B to A, so A would be 2, and then we'd assign a new value to temp, and so forth. So let's go ahead and check out this program. I'm going to run this over here. And I'm going to open up this tab, put a breakpoint right there. Show me Fibonacci. All right, so all this stuff is declared like we just talked about. While number of 24 is greater than 0, we're going to loop through this. So we're going to loop through like 24 times, I think. So A is 1. So we give temp the value of 1. Is now A is 1 as well. B is 0. B is reassigned the value of temp, which was 1. And then for my message that I'm going to display to the user, if we look back at this, it just says display the Fibonacci series in a comma delimited list. Okay, and so that's what we're going to do. So right here I have message, which was declared as just 0. I'm going to add comma, space, and then B, whatever B is, which now it's 1. Okay, I'm going to put a breakpoint inside my loop and hit F8. Okay, we assign temp the value of A, which was 1. A gets incremented up to 2 because it just added A and B, which both were 1. And then B gets the value of temp. And then message, which is currently 0, 1, will get added. We'll add B on there as well, which is 1 again. Okay, so you can see this is kind of starting up. Okay, we have 0 plus 1 equals 1. 1 plus 1, we can kind of guess what our next one's going to be. Because A is 2, we're going to assign that to temp. And then 2 plus 1 is 3. Okay, we'll assign temp to B, and then we'll add B onto there. Okay, and B and A is already 3. Okay, so we're just going to keep on looping through. If I hit F8 a couple of times, we'll jump ahead a little bit. And you can see that this is just growing nicely, adding the previous two numbers. Okay, does that make sense? Do you guys have questions about this one? Okay. As a side note, you guys won't have anything on your exam that I feel is this hard, or as hard as the last one especially. So just so you guys know. A lot that you can do with loops though, for sure. Any other programs that you guys want to see?
I have a question about either 9 or 10.
Yeah.
I don't know how to display the kind of the grid, like a 12 by 12 something, or in 9 it has the kind of list of numbers.
Yeah.
Just do that for you when you get the program, or is there something with the output you change?
There's something with the output. It does not do it for you. Programs hardly ever do things for you, sadly. All right, so if I was looking at this, this kind of looks like a table to me. And so I would Google HTML table. Okay, because this isn't in JavaScript. Okay, we're looking at the output, and you're talking about formatting, how it's going to look on the page. Okay, so to be able to do this, I would want to figure out how to like do a table first. Okay, so if I Google like HTML table, I can look at this and be like, wow, you know, that's really pretty formatting. And if I change this and added a few columns and shortened the widths a little bit, you know, it could look like a times table, or you know, something like that. So we'd want to use an HTML table to do that formatting. Because if I was going to add like spaces, between those numbers every time, that could get really hard, especially when the numbers start changing. Like the number of digits in the number, it'd be really hard to get the spacing right. And so we would use a table, okay? And this table syntax looks really complicated and convoluted, but you just have a bunch of tags, okay? We have the opening table tag and a closing one down here. The TRs are rows, and then the TDs are the columns, and the TH are the columns as well. Got a question here in the chat. Let's look at that real quick. Can you weaponize loops, adding a variable each pass so the output gets so large it crashes either the browser or the program, whichever it rests in? Yes. Yes, you can. That's an excellent question. Coming from a security professional. That is, yeah. There are different security attacks that do similar things. Yes. All right. So now that we've looked at a table, and I could copy this and mess around with it and see how this would look, and I could run this in my program. So let's look at this. You notice that there's like a lot of repeated code here. There's lots of TDs, lots of TRs. I can throw this into a loop, okay? And so if I looked at one of those programs, which was it 10?
Yeah.
Build a 12, okay. So let's look at this one here. So I have a function called generate table, and this was for the 12 by 12 multiplication table, okay? So I don't have any input. The processing is calculates and creates a multiplication table. And then we output the display, the table. Okay, so look at what I'm doing in this loop. I have my table string, okay? Now, with JavaScript libraries like Angular, React, even jQuery, these are all different JavaScript libraries that make making tables really easy. And if you will not see something like this in a professional environment, at least you really shouldn't, because there are better ways to do this, but that require a little bit more foundation first. Okay, but I can make a table out of a string. Okay, I declare a string in JavaScript called table string, and I start it off as just table. And if I look in here, you guys can imagine I'm just going to like build out this table by using the plus equals sign and just adding to my table string, okay? And then at the very end of it, I'm going to close my table string and then display it, okay? So I have to loop for each row, and then each side of each row, I have to loop for each column, okay? So table size, I let the user put in a number, which is just gonna be 12 if we're doing a 12 by 12 multiplication table. So row equals 1, while row is less than or equal to 12, increment row. For every single row, I'm going to add the row tag in HTML to my table string. And then for every column, I'm going to loop through another 12 times. And then I'm going to add the TD for the column tag, and then column times row, which would just be wherever we are in our loops, 1 times 1 or 1 times 2, 1 times 3, and then add a closing TD tag. And then at the end of every row, I close the row tag. Then at the end of the table, I close the table tag, and then I display that. Okay, so if I ran this right now, let me copy this file path. Any questions about this before we run it? Okay. And I paste it in here. So if I put in like 3, I have an error in my code somewhere. Oh, there we go. All right, so I have 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and then just have a nice little multiplication table here. I did add some styling. That's what this if statement is for. I said if the column is equal to the row, so this diagonal line, I'm going to change the background color of that cell. So that's what I did with this statement right here. Otherwise, I wouldn't need that. And then up here, I said, all right, for the first row and the first column, I'm going to make those numbers big and bold. Okay. And so if I typed in like 15 and generated the table, you know, it was just something that I added. But you can see every single time I looped through it, the column was being multiplied by the row to make this multiplication table. So as far as the formatting, like you asked, you know, like I said, Google the HTML table first. Yeah, you can do something like this.
That's cool. I didn't think of plus and I didn't think of using words and different HTML in the, because we've just been using numbers. So I'm glad you showed it to us.
Yeah, yeah. I'm glad you asked. All right. Well, any other questions before we dive into the exam? And then you can ask more questions. All right, well, let's do this then. Close that and all that. Okay, so I just added this to the announcement because I realized that I had forgotten to add this. But in the announcement now, there is the practice exam for exam 2 and the exam with answers. And that's what we're going to look at right now.